Okay, Namo Myo Renge Kyo, Namo Myo Renge Kyo, Namo Myo Renge Kyo. How are you? I hope you're in good health and secure. Thank you. Is it Engel? I should have looked at that before I got our new patron through PayPal. Thank you so much for joining our Sangha and supporting our Sangha. You may have joined a long time ago, but you just started with contributions, and we're all tremendously grateful for your support. I just can't get this to sit right one of these days. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit more today. I'm going to do a couple of videos today. We're going to continue with the BDK Lotus Sutra, of course. But I wanted to interrupt because I put a little follow along or a visual aid, a PowerPoint up on threefoldlotus.com, and I'll just show you the slides here. It's about self again because it continues to come up, and there is a link on the threefoldlotus.com website on the core study materials page that says what is quote-unquote self. And that's a long discourse, a collection of research and my own discourse on the nature of self. But there seems, I've identified there's this stumbling block. And in the last video, I said something about it, and I thought, I don't know if that was satisfactory or not. So I'm going to give it another stab today. Just brief, just simple. I don't want to get way in the weeds because there's a lot of conversation about that. I have some Nagarjuna quotes that I've read into the record here in videos. You can look those up. I've been doing analysis of self since 1995, and so even my rhetoric has evolved over time. But just take a look at this and see if it's helpful at all for you. Here's the first page. It's just basically self, identifying that there are two ways of viewing the self. And it's important to know this because there's this impression as you practice that somehow when we attain enlightenment that we lose or get rid of the self. And there's a lot of rhetoric in the translations and in the teachings that kind of sound that way. And what I want to point out is that in the samsaric sense, when we're talking about self, we're talking about the ego self. We're talking about the self that accumulates data, that possesses, that owns. It's a very materialistic. And even if it's a relationship or feelings, it's still material in that the way we think about it and the thousands and thousands of its every day is data. It's data. It's not information. It's data that we then take ownership of. We possess it. We own it. And this implies a sort of a bringing this along with me. The samsaric self is something that spans time, right? We think of a lifetime as this series of moment to moment. You might agree, yeah, okay, I get that moment to moment, but you don't really. Because in each moment, you think of the self as something that's collecting identifiers in the form of stuff, things. This is where the cravings and clingings come from, right? Shakyamuni talked about it a lot. So does Nietzsche, so does every scholar. But there's this subtle point that's critical to understand. And so the next slide, I say, the samsaric self, the materialistic self, accrues data for identification as an ever-growing picture of, understanding of self. This is a self that things happen to or are taken from and always leaves a mark, right? What is happening to me is a statement that see, language just falls apart because it's not granular enough. This is happening to me is a statement about me-ness over a lot of time, a collective self that is being imposed upon in a certain manner, and it's going to leave a mark, right? This idea of permanentizing the idea of self. These marks, additions, losses, etc., they build the growing identity. So when you hear me talking about identity, this is what I'm talking about. That accrued warehouse of data, right? You've heard me say that. This the way that we think about the self as an ever-growing, expanding collection of bringing it along with us, right? Into the next moment. I am all of that and this now, and it projects into the future, right? And you say, well, Seafood, this is what you talk about. You talk about the karmic freight train. Okay, I understand the confusion, and the language is becoming more clear to me why there may be confusion, okay? So the next slide, let's take a look at it. The samsaric self, the way we understand the self in everyday parlance, right? The way we speak about it. We have a self, a central, a core self, which we might identify as that karmic freight train. But here's why it's not just the freight locomotive, it's all the cars that get added to it, one after another. Every single data point, a data point of a dog barking at us, a data point of trying cheese and liking it or disliking it, a data point of changing weather, changing shoe size, every little thing that we observe, catalog as in our experience, becomes a data point like a bubble, and it attaches itself to that central self. That is the self grows by adding data, stuff, things, events, everything. And that whole thing then becomes, the samsaric self becomes the samsaric identity, this cloud that's ever growing, never stops growing. And that's how we think of ourself. Because everything that happens to us, we catalog as part of who we are. Right? That's the samsaric. This must sound like totally repetitive to you because this is how we actually think about the self. But then Buddhism comes along and says, no, this is why you suffer. This is the point. The more bubbles you attach to this idea of self and this growing identity that is actually the self, the samsaric self, well, how do you keep track of all that stuff? Of course you're stressed. Of course you're anxious. Of course you can't possibly manage it all. It's crazy. You're dragging every past experience, event, stuff, thing along with you in your idea. Remember, Buddhism is about the mind. In your idea of who you are, what you are, your self. And Buddhism says, no, throw that thinking away. Here's the way we're going to understand the self. The self, to Buddhist thinking, is dynamic. It doesn't have a thing that other things get attached to. Remember the thing, the self, not self, the thingifying, the identification, right? Scrap all that. Don't try to force fit Buddhist self into that self. Understand that Buddhist self, unlike samsara, which says, okay, Sifu, we live moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, what you are missing is that that's not a cumulative self. Remember the cycle? It's called birth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death. Each moment is yourself. And that self gone into the next moment, self again. This is why I say it'd be more appropriate to say selfing. There is no residual. There is no glomming on of all this data. It doesn't disappear. It's that our mental relationship with who we are is a moment-to-moment realization of being. Being as a function of the tendencies, the skandhas, are not, maybe I should have identified that in samsara. Because we think of the self, we start with it as the 10 factors, right? Appearance and so on and so forth. And that's concretizing, that's thingifying, right? And then we just keep adding to all of that, all of those factors. But in Buddhism, we're not that. We are 5 aggregates or heaps of clinging. And this is the important thing to understand. The clinging is not a thing, but what it is aimed at is a thing. So what we do in Buddhism is we observe, become aware of the clinging, and sure enough, we're clinging to data, to things, and so forth. But instead of staying completely immersed in that clinging activity, we instead become aware of it so we can see it, acknowledge it, and then move on from it. We don't stay with it. So form, sensations, perceptions, formations, consciousness, those are the karmic freight train of which we are an instantiation of, but we're instantiated over and over and over every moment, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And each moment is a cycle of birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. So the self doesn't accrue stuff. The dynamic self does not grow identity, but is altered by events. These tendencies evolve and change in each moment to moment of experience in constant change. So our life changes through over time, not because more stuff has been accrued that affects the way we are, but rather we are functions of tendencies that over time are influenced, that we alter, that we make effort to change, that we change the direction of, right? And in the next moment, then we're that. We're not what we were before. We may recollect moments before, but even if you call this out, the memory thing, no matter how accurately you want to try to remember something that happened 10 years ago or 10 seconds ago, you are now thinking about that event with all of the karmic reality of the tendencies that you have now instantiated. It's different. It's not what it was. You can call it out just like the days on a calendar. Yes, there was a Monday on that particular time, but your recollection of that Monday is not what happened that Monday. It is what you're now assembling with who you are, your karmic freight train at this moment of that event. It's not the same. I don't care how bad the car accident was. What you remember of it, the feelings of it, the sensations of it, the formations of it, the dynamic freight train of karma that you are now, moment to moment to moment to moment, is new every single time. And so you have a record of something because it's imprinted in your tendencies and conditions, but your experience of it is always different, moment to moment to moment to moment. That moment That's yourself in Buddhism. It's unattached to the previous and the future. It only exists as a moment to be affected by or to influence the momentum. Remember the ball rolling down the hill? The ball is always the ball in every single moment, whether it runs through mud or water or hits a rock or bounces off a car tire. It's just the ball, just like you are just the self. You are an experiencer of the engine of life. You are not a thing. You are a mind, an observing mind, a consciousness, affected by and influencing of this entire engine of life. Words. Do you see what I'm pointing to, though? In a way, it's very liberating, isn't it? To know that you really don't have to carry that baggage of every single thing. It's not you. It's just an event that happened on a timeline. But the line, as I've pointed out before, the line is really an illusion, because if you look closely enough at the line, it's a series of points. It's a series of locations. Locations where? In time and space. That's how we relate to time and space. Just by location. And your location is in the moment that you're considering your location. Nowhere else. Right now. That's how we liberate ourselves from the attachments of the moments that came before, because they're irrelevant. Okay. So that's my little blurb for today. It's going to be a short one. Yeah, 17 minutes. Anyway, those slides that I put up are a PDF document, and as I was saying earlier, there's a link on the course study page, course study materials page, that says what is self. Right next to it, it says Buddhist SELF. So really easy to make a comparison, yeah? It's not a super detailed document, but with kind of a follow along with the videos and so forth, maybe it works as a reminder, like one of those things you put on the fridge. I'm not telling you to put it on the fridge. I'm just saying it's like note to self. Oh, yeah. Right? Hey, use it if it works for you. Hopefully it brings up some insights in some of you, or maybe some questions. Help me hone in on that. Let's make it a really solid understanding, yeah? Because a lot of people, especially from other schools of Buddhism, quote unquote, they're really lost about this because they equate self and soul, and it just gets into a mire of argumentation. And if you understand the self is something that occurs moment by moment, not accrues moment by moment, but occurs entire life, moment to moment, then you begin to understand multiple lifetimes, the cycle of birth and death. That's also, now it clicks, yeah? And then the idea of something that endures, like a soul, or even a self, as an internal, quote-unquote, thing, is just nonsense when you understand. All right. I think that's about as much as I can say on this without just looping back around. So hopefully that's helpful. I'll put this up as just one of those basics. And now I'll get back to the BDK Lotus Sutra, yeah? Thanks for listening. Please take care of your health. Keep your practice strong. Help support the channel any way you can. The easiest way is to like and subscribe, right? It doesn't cost you anything, takes a few seconds. But it really is meaningful to the algorithms of YouTube. It helps grow our Sangha and propagate the resource. So thank you for that. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.